Alright, so this video is going to be dedicated to kind of defining a few terms and phases as it pertains to dissociation. First off, it's important to realize that dissociation of itself does not mean that the person dissociating has a disorder. Dissociation can be as simple as going downstairs, turning on the television, and just tuning out for a while. And that kind of break from reality can be very, very therapeutic, because frankly, there are a lot of things in our reality that suck. And getting away from those things for a little while so we can just rest a little bit, try to come back to it with a little bit more energy, maybe a slightly better mindset, or just, the energy to keep on going and hopefully find something of some worth at some point, which can get a lot of people into a lot of trouble. And I'll kind of explain that going forward into the next couple of steps. But the next step is a singular dissociative event. This usually happens because something extremely traumatic happened. And the mind decided that the best way to deal with it was just block it out. If we could just get rid of this one thing, this one event, this one time, then everything else works just like it should. So, life isn't that clean. Different life experiences kind of poke at that box, and I guess the best way to describe it, is I've kind of described it before, is if nature hates a vacuum, people hate to leave empty spaces alone. Have a tendency to want to keep on poking at it until whatever is there that you're trying to keep off limits becomes accessible. And there's a lot wrong with that, but it is the way that people are. So that usually ends up backfiring at some point or another, and trying to figure out what's causing it, how to deal with it, becomes an issue later on. But in and of itself, maybe not the worst coping tool out there. But then that leads us into the next, and that is, what happens if it wasn't a singular event? What happens if there were multiple events, or maybe they weren't the same type of event, but you suffered trauma repeatedly, enough so that you started dissociating frequently instead of infrequently? Well, now we're getting into some of the meat of DDD, and basically this now constitutes a disorder. It's now an ingrained instinctual coping tool, and the problem with it is that by not associating where, how, when you relied on this in order to overcome what, you're more and more likely to abuse that coping mechanism to the point that you essentially lose track of your life and your life's experiences, and you don't grow from them. And all of these reasons and many more factor into why this has essentially at this point become a disorder. Now, then you get into another phase, and if this continues, that I call DPD, and that is dissociative personality disorder. Dissociative personality disorder is not the same as DID, which is dissociative identity disorder. Most people will be more familiar with it being referred to as multiple personality disorder. That's what DID had been known as for a long time. But DPD, unlike DID, where there is a split and there is more than one personality in play, DPD is more like you have been putting your life on the back burner so much that you're actually living more of your life on the back burner than you are on the front burner, so to speak. And so as a result, what happens is you start to identify yourself as all the stuff you keep on throwing on the back burner, which has a couple of nasty effects. One, now all the shit that you had been putting on the back burner, trying to get yourself away from, now it's an integral part of your identity and you can't get away from it. Because your core personality doesn't take things the way that your dissociative personality or your dissociative mind took things away from your core personality. So now your core personality is sitting on that front burner like it's a back burner, and your dissociative personality is sitting on the back burner that you believe is the front burner. The core personality has gone into sort of like a dormant state. Best I can explain it. It's like there's not enough to that core personality because you've been dissociating so much that it integrates with everything else going on enough to be an active part of whatever is going on around you. It's just your dissociative self now. So it's not really DID. It can seem a little bit like that if you get better. And if you get worse, it probably will manifest into more than one personality if it hasn't already, because you may be experiencing DPD as a result of trying to get away from mental disorder of some kind, or psychological disorder of some kind or another that was threatening you. And you may have ended up trying to compartmentalize that and demonize it and essentially turn it into its own personality. So you could very well be already dealing with both DPD and DID symptoms, and yeah, it gets nasty really quick. DID usually more typically presents as a result of that singular overly traumatic moment that may or may not have been supported by other frequent occurrences, but really it tends to sprout from that really majorly traumatic moment. And it basically forms it forms a separate identity that essentially takes the brunt of the damage from the core personality, so that the core personality can be put on the back burner. The other personality can take the heat, and then the core personality can come back when the heat is settled and it's not as threatening. And there really is a lot to DID. There's really a lot to dissociation as as a whole. But then if those people suffering from DPD or DID start getting the help that they need and actually manage to make a recovery, there's another aspect that I've spent a lot of videos talking about, and that's the DDD, the Dissociative Developmental Disorder. If you've been gone from your life that much, you're missing a lot of key experiences. And what happens when you're missing enough of these key experiences, you aren't able to function, not because of whatever problems or disorders were creating disturbances in your life, but simply because of the fact that things that should be there are not there. Things that allow us to relate to one another aren't there. Things that allow us to find meaning or a sense of identity are not there. Tools and hobbies, special interests are not there. There's just a lot of nothing where there should be something. And that's because of that reliance on dissociation as a coping tool. Basically the goal is to start confronting that discrepancy, but you have to be careful because the core personality may actually have more in common with a small child or with a younger you that isn't as capable as your dissociative self was, because it hasn't spent that time maturing. But there are limits to how a dissociative self can grow, and the core self can grow beyond a lot of those limits. And that's why it's important to foster the core self over the dissociative self. But it's going to take a lot of time in order for the dissociative self, or in order for the core self to emerge over the dissociative self. And it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take honoring the difference in capabilities and psychology between the two, and depending on the gap, it's questionable whether or not that gap will ever be made up for. So a lot of issues there. But in any case, that's it for this video. Next video, one of the things I want to talk about is that discrepancy and the ability to make up some of that time. How realistic is it or not? So that's what I'm going to be working on next. See you guys in the next video.